Welcome to Current Affairs. My name is Nathan Robinson. I'm the editor-in-chief of Current Affairs magazine. Today on the program, Samuel Miller McDonald returns to speak with us. He is a regular contributor to Current Affairs, the author of an upcoming book on progress, human progress, which he is opposed to or somewhat critical of. And he is the author, importantly for our purposes today, of a new article in our 41st print issue. The article is called Being Mr. Clothes. It is about menswear, in which both Samuel Miller McDonald and I have a keen interest. Samuel Miller McDonald, thank you so much for joining us on Current Affairs.
Thanks so much, Nathan. Yeah, happy to be talking to you.
Let me begin by just reading to our listeners the opening of your wonderful piece. And I put, as the editor, I sort of put a subhead in here and in the form of a question. And the question I put was, can the love of menswear be justified in a time of global crisis? It's addressed over the course of your piece, but here's how it opens. The various tubes and vessels that everyone slides their body parts into every day, clothes, are broadly considered to be at best the domain of the frivolous and unserious. At worst, they're the preoccupation of the narcissist. But even a passing reflection on the facts reveals this popular notion to be absurd. Clothes have enabled human beings to colonize virtually all of the earth. Homo sapiens would have remained an exclusively tropical species had it not figured out how to clad its heat-dissipating skin in the heat-trapping skins and furs of other animals or the fibers of plants. Those of us who live in cold and wet climates, clothes are a survival necessity. Clothes also represent a non-trivial part of most people's annual budget and, more importantly, daily life, whether they admit it or not, given that we're all surrounded by them in the most literal way possible. More consequentially, textile production and distribution are major sources of waste and pollution. Clothes manufacturing contributes to widespread labor abuses all over the world. Anyone who wears clothes is tied up in this web of human exploitation and environmental degradation. That's the first paragraph of Being Mr. Clothes. Now, my question for you, Sam Miller McDonald, is, you've set us up there by saying that anyone who wears clothes is tied up in a web of human exploitation and environmental degradation. That doesn't sound like it's going to lead us towards a defense of liking nice clothes.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think that's true of so many things. Our food, so many of our basic necessities, I think, are wrapped up in, some of those same or parallel webs of exploitation and degradation. But that doesn't stop us from liking nice food or seeking it out or, celebrating it when we can have it. I think if people cared more about what they wore, thought more about the clothes that they were engaging with, wearing, appreciating, I think that's a really important first step to addressing those problems. And I think those problems come from negligence. They come from people not caring about what they're wearing, why they're wearing it, and just going for what's cheapest or, whatever these massive clothing corporations are throwing at them. So I think most of the piece is kind of just a defense of thinking more deliberately and carefully about what it is we're, sliding onto the body parts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's something strange that happens in the way that people, especially people kind of on the left, talk about and think about clothes, which is that, as you know, I am a person who likes clothes. You're a person who likes clothes. I'm not actually much of a menswear guy, because real menswear guys, they think about the cut of their clothes, and they think about a lot of things, and they think about the fabrics, and they think about all kinds of things that I don't really think about. I'm very much I'm a dumb clothes lover, right? I like ugly thrift store jackets that are fun, but I am someone who thinks about clothes, and I like having a colorful shirt. I like thinking about what colors I like, right? I don't have an interest in fancy tailoring, but I do have an interest in clothes. And I get a lot of shit from people online who seem to associate liking, a jacket or wearing a collared shirt with being somehow bourgeois. I mean, they don't even know what it costs. They don't even know what the clothes cost. I think people assume I'm wealthy because I wear jackets.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been really fascinating to see some of the discourse evolve just around your clothes. Seeing people giving you all this criticism, I think, largely to avoid engaging with your actual arguments and writing.
Yes, they go into the clothes because they can't handle the arguments.
Exactly. And to see that, yeah, and make all these assumptions about the cost and class and whatever, I think more recently just seeing a little bit of that change to really be respecting your drip, your impeccable style, your, really.
Yeah. I have an imposter on Twitter who's done a lot to help my reputation because he's really funny.
Oh, yeah. I think I've seen that. But I appreciate that people are thinking a little bit more about clothes as a thing to celebrate and to think about and do deliberately. I've seen that evolution just with respect to your own style. And it's not proliferated, I think, broadly enough yet. But hopefully that's something that's changing a little bit on the left.
Yeah, I've never really thought about, the funny thing is I've never really thought that much. I think about clothes, but I don't think about why I think about clothes, right? I've never really reflected very much on why I wear things that are different to what other people wear. And your article kind of got me thinking about this. And you talk a bit about how wearing clothes that you like can give you this feeling of strength and defiance. I feel like if I had to speculate on why I started wearing like jackets, I honestly think it was kind of in middle school or high school, a kind of defiance thing, strangely enough. I wanted to, not just stand out from my peers, but I got in a lot of arguments with the school administration. And when you go into arguments like that, you feel a little empowered when you're in a jacket and tie.
Yeah, absolutely. I have a tiny anecdote in it about being a kid wearing cowboy boots all the time.
Yes.
And like I was a super quiet, voted the quietest male in my school of like 500 kids or whatever, quiet, shy kid. But that was a way to kind of like feel defiant or feel more confident or whatever it was. Wanted to feel like a cowboy. So put on the boots and boom, there it is.
You felt great in the boots, right?
Yeah, totally. I'm in the Wild West. I'm herding cattle here. And then through, middle school, went through these different phases, different subcultures, which I think it can also do. It can be defiance or it can be affiliation and connection to a community or a subculture or a group who's going to protect you or you're going to protect them. You're going to go against this school, administrators together or whatever it is. And I think it can, into adulthood can continue to play that. I mean, you're still going fighting these big, powerful guys and, writing these takedowns and going on the programs. And I think the suit and tie gives you a legitimacy, it gives you a sense of authority that I think not wearing nice clothes, it can be detracting from that, I think.
My own kind of theory of my clothes is, to the extent that I have one, of what I'm trying to do is almost like not dandyism, but almost like a parody of a gentleman, because I wear ties, but they're like loud paisley ties. And I feel like I associate them most strongly with Charlie Chaplin's Tramp character, who dressed like a gentleman, but like in these ill-fitting clothes. And it was a way that character, we have an episode about Charlie Chaplin actually, and that that character like tries to assert his dignity in a system in which he does not have much power by kind of taking some of the clothes of the powerful and simultaneously like stealing that power and also kind of parodying it and mocking it with the clothes.
Absolutely, yeah. That reminds me of that Congolese group.
Yes, you talk in the article about the Sapeurs.
Yeah, exactly. And wearing these big sort of garish colors and big suits. And while they're in this, these conditions of extreme poverty and civil war. And that is coming from a tradition that is going back to British colonialism. And I think doing what you're saying, both co-opting and mocking the British style that is being worn by the administrators there. Or the Zoot Suits.
The Zoot Suits, yes.
Pointed out to me as well. That is a great example of wearing these massive, loose-fitting suits, broad lapels, the high waists, the baggy jackets, and just taking up space in places where I think, this is largely being worn by Black and Latino men in times of segregation and in places where they might not be welcome or feel welcome. And they're just, they're wearing these big, loud suits, taking up more space to, I think, give that feeling of defiance and dignity.
Defiance and dignity, yeah. The Zoot Suit is so fascinating. Like, why a big giant baggy suit. Like, why? and you can see why, because as you say, it takes up space. It's like it's interesting because they did seem cool, and the Sapuras really seem cool. They look incredible. But when you try to explain, like, what is it that makes them cool? What is it that made the Zoots? I don't know if wearing a Zoot suit would make you cool in 2023, although there was a Zoot suit trend. I would love it. But what did it do in the 1940s? Because it did spark a backlash.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I think part of that was, you get wartime government overreach. You have the rationing really trying to control people's consumption at that time. And I think that was a little bit in response to that.
But they said they're using too much fabric. It should be used to make uniforms.
Yeah, exactly. These voluminous.
How dare you?
Yeah.
You're helping Hitler.
Yeah, exactly. The riots were started by some sailors in Los Angeles who were angry about that and, tore the suits off the kids. And you can say like, well, they should have been more patriotic or whatever. We're fighting Hitler. But the government at the time was also doing some overreach. They were putting, Japanese people in concentration camps, and FDR did some power grabs and stayed in office way longer than any president. And I think it's important not to lose sight of the importance of pushing back against wartime, power grabs that all governments do. And the US did, even if you can justify it as a just war, there's still, I think, value and role of saying, we're going to exercise some agency in the face of this, the War Production Board.
Yeah. It's funny because there's this kind of idea that men in particular who are interested in clothes, like it's bourgeois or it's non-leftist, or like, oh, well, only people who have wealth can afford to have nice clothes. But in fact, when you look at the history, it has often been people who have very little power and wealth who use clothes and nice clothes as a kind of equalizer, because you don't have real wealth and power, but what you can do is you can look better and feel dignified and good. Like all those Zoot suiters and the Sapuras, they don't have any money. I mean, they spend what they have on their suits, on them making their suits nice. And I think that the same is true with people who decorate their cars, and there's all kinds of things that, like, you might spend a lot of money doing it, but it's not because you have a lot of money. It's because, like, when you don't have a lot of money, this is a thing that can give you massive returns in terms of how good it makes you feel and look, and how much it kind of elevates your personal feeling of status in a system where objectively you don't have much.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the worst things about economic inequality and capitalism and all of this is the psychological warfare that it wages against people, and feelings of despair and hopelessness and feeling small and feeling like you have no freedom or agency. And I think this is at least one important way to reclaim some of that and to fight against that psychological warfare, and to proclaim that you do have some agency. You are worthy of respect and recognition as an individual, in a symbolic way, and it's a surface level way, but I think it does have real psychological impact. And what the piece talks about a little bit as well is when you combine that, when you make that a collective action thing, and you have movements, class solidarity movements, whatever, dressing in a kind of coordinated way, that can be also an effective tactic in building a sense of uniformity or a commitment to a movement, a group, a class, whatever it might be, a union. And it can have these, I think, reverberating effects on the effectiveness of whatever strikes, movements, challenges.
Well, the Black Panthers, who I think you cite in your piece, they terrified people in power, and they did that partially because they carried guns, but in no small part because the leather jackets, in which they looked fantastic, were menacing. And you can see that the leather jackets were integral to what the Black Panthers were trying to do. And it wasn't a frivolous, dispensable side part of the building of their power. It was part of it.
Absolutely. The Bolsheviks also big leather jacket wearers, which I didn't know and learned in the course of this. And you can't underestimate the importance of looking cool for getting more members, get it for building whatever it is you want to build.
Right. People are like, God, I'm sure people join the Black Panthers. It's just like also sometimes people join the military because of the uniform. I swear, God, they understand that the uniforms are often objectively kind of silly looking. If you look at military uniforms over the course of history, I actually have a book here called Battle Dress that is military uniforms over the course of history. And oftentimes they're woefully impractical and they probably undermine the effectiveness of any fighting force. They're very decorative, actually, strangely. That's sort of changed as warfare has gotten more brutal and they've had to, when the British realized that wearing red coats was putting a target on their back, right? But there is a purpose to doing it, which is that the clothes help cultivate the sense of solidarity and dignity. And you're like, I want to wear that. I want to look like that guy.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. Classic example of that is the Nazis who, enlisted like the, Balenciaga and Christian Dior and Coco Chanel and Hugo Boss, these huge names, still huge names in fashion, were making these really imposing, cool-looking uniforms. Probably did have something to do with collectivity that they're cultivating and the mystique that I think attracted people.
Yeah. Fascism's appeal is in part aesthetic, right? Because the actual ideas are horrible, but then they put on the images, the imagery, right? They think a lot about. And so much is aesthetic that we don't necessarily think of. An example I think we've written about in Current Affairs before is how important a judge's robe is to their credibility. If you take away the Supreme Court justices' robes and you made them wear T-shirts, overnight, it would be much harder to take them seriously. Like, it just would be harder.
They're just some guy.
Like, you're just a person. You're not anything.
Yeah, totally. And that's something that I think has been, unfortunately, kind of forgotten in the left or in the egalitarian movements, is the real power that clothing can have. And that I think is important to remember and important to try to recultivate that, because it has been forgotten. It's something that was very important to movements in the past, working class and Black Panther and so forth.
Yeah. And you know how people on the right are like so threatened by or horrified by like purple hair. Like they're always going, oh, the purple hair is social justice warriors. And like in a workplace, often like having piercings or purple hair, it's like, that's inappropriate. There's some weird sense that it's like a threat, or like it's inherently an insult for you to wear certain things. I think there's like a bill in Texas that someone proposed, about this whole drag scare that was like requiring legislators to wear like biologically appropriate clothing. The sense that, if we start subverting the clothing norms by allowing drag or allowing trans people to wear what they want, the foundations of Western civilization will crumble.
Yeah, totally. And I think that's another issue where I think clothing is so important and is sometimes, undervalued as a tool, or like gender itself is performed through clothing in such a long period of time. And I think it's something that can be used as a way to subvert gender norms or to reinforce them, as this bill that you're talking about is trying to do. And all of these ripple effects through just really basic things of getting dressed in the morning and going about your day, and how much that can infringe upon, these really fundamental freedoms of just self-expression. And it's weird how much the like violating traditional gender norms just fries brains. I even think like I've written this whole thing and I think I'm still underestimating the importance of clothing, of how you're presenting and to how it really impacts the way people think and experience the world.
You quote in the piece, or you mention in the piece, this guy who's become very popular on Twitter in recent months called Derek Guy, who is the kind of menswear commentator on Twitter. And he does a few things that I like. One thing that I like is that he makes this argument over and over that liking expensive clothes doesn't necessarily mean you're a rich person. In fact, if you want clothes that are ethically made, oftentimes they're going to be expensive. And he often says, like, people want $2 shirts and they can't have $2 shirts because $2 shirts are made in sweatshops. And, highlighting people who are working class but still, like clothes, and saying that that's okay. It doesn't make you anti-leftist if you like clothes. So I like that he does that. But the other thing he does seems to have pretty sound progressive politics. He viciously mocks all of these horrible right-wingers who make massive fashion faux pas. And he shows you like how badly Ron DeSantis' suits fit. And honestly, I don't know that he's not going to end Ron DeSantis' presidential campaign by mocking the fit of his suits. But it does kind of have a humiliating effect. I do think it kind of punctures their seriousness in a certain way.
Yeah, definitely. And maybe, one of the best examples of that is Jordan Peterson, pointed out a few times that Jordan Peterson is putting forth this like really traditionalist kind of worldview and is always talking about, well, we need to dress more traditionally and, wear these traditional markers of whatever masculinity and so forth. But then he's wearing these clothes that make a mockery of traditional markers of masculinity, that are violating all of the rules of traditional tailoring and fit and suits, and, wearing insane color combinations. Like he had that jacket that was like half blue and half red in one jacket, and he's wearing like skinny trousers and the monk shoes and things that are going against everything, all the markers of good taste and traditional styling, and simultaneously advocating for this extremely, traditionalist kind of viewpoint. And I think it certainly undermines his authority in that, at least.
Have you seen Jordan Peterson's Twitter suit?
I don't think so.
Oh, I'm going to show you right now, and we're going to put a link to this. This is Jordan Peterson did a video where he showcased someone had custom made him a new 3-piece suit, and it's his Twitter suit, and it's cream and Twitter blue are the colors. The lining of the suit consists of reprints of the Twitter bird and I think of Elon Musk's tweets.
Oh, God.
And it has an accompanying tie that is a pattern made of pictures of Elon Musk's face.
That's horrible. That's horrific.
Have you ever seen an uglier, tackier suit? Is my question for you.
That's definitely the winner. There's so much here. It's weird. I feel like Peterson's neuroses are becoming increasingly transparent. And that's one way that these increasingly insane suits, that it's really coming out. The guy's unhinged. I think that's that example. Anybody can look at that and say, okay, that's clownish. I think some of his other examples, if you don't have the language, if you don't know these traditional markers, you might just say, oh, he's just wearing a suit. Yeah, of course, we all got to wear a suit because the suit's masculine or whatever.
Yeah.
But I think what I appreciate Derek I doing is coming out and saying, you got to learn these particular things so you can look at Jordan Peterson's suit that just looks like a normal suit, but it's not. It's this bastardization that is a complete, mockery of these traditional things that he's claiming to be promoting. And I think that's something that is, I'm also not a huge menswear guy. I'm an amateur to this, but also, trying to learn what makes a good silhouette and how do you combine certain colors and what's a traditional fit for a jacket and trousers and so forth.
And one of the things you find, I feel like, is tempting to say, well, the rules are arbitrary. You can get frustrated when, people like Derek Guy who are like, oh, this is the bad thing. See, you can get a little, postmodernist and go like, well, but who's the authority here? Where is the objective truth of the rules of menswear? On what grounds are you saying this is bad and something else is good? If Zoot Suits are okay, then why aren't Ron DeSantis' baggy suits? But oftentimes, as much as I want to say that, when you see a really well-dressed man, you go, damn, that does look good. That does flatter his body. I spent money. I didn't get a bespoke suit, but I got a suit custom, the suit I use when I do speaking engagements. I got a custom tailored. And I have to say, I look better. It's like it fits my body nicely. It's like it's really comfortable and it just like everything, it's made for me. It makes you feel so good to have something where it's like, this container for me like matches the thing it contains.
Yeah, definitely, for sure. I think anyone can see that, like even if they don't have the language for it or don't know these obscure markers or whatever, like anyone can look at a fabric and say like that's a high quality fabric that a lot of hours went into weaving that, whatever it might be, or the silhouette's perfect. Don't know why, not sure what it is, but it just all these elements come together. Looks great and feels great. And for me as well, like, even when I'm just doing the casual wear thing, sometimes I just put things together and it just comes together and feels great and looks great. And don't always know why, but there's definitely there's some kind of objective thing going on there that I think is real.
Graphic design is very similar because I design the magazine. And so I've had to sort of teach myself graphic design and I'm still very much like an amateur at it, but it turns out the rules of graphic design kind of do make sense. Like there are colors that fit together and there are colors that don't. There are ways of making a page where everything looks kind of askew and out of whack. And there are ways where everything is just all of the elements on the page are just really well balanced. And a reader of a magazine will not be able to tell you why a particular page looks good and another one looks ugly. As an amateur designer, I have now had to figure out why one of those looks ugly and one of those looks good. But it's true that people know it when they see it. They know when good design is working, and they know when something is like, oh, what is that?
Yeah, definitely. And something that I'm interested in, speaking of that principle, is the extent to which limits can bring out creativity and require finding those harmonious balances. When I think about like buildings, modern buildings, I think you've had a lot of limitations removed. You have design software that lets architects just make crazy, weird shapes that they couldn't make without that design software. And you have these, mass manufactured materials that wouldn't have been accessible a long time ago. And you have way more money than has ever existed in the world being poured into them. And what you get are these insane buildings that are not beautiful. They're just this whim of this sort of untethered imagination. I think you see that in filmmaking as well. You see like practical effects require, they put limits on what you can do. And it requires being really creative and making a film that's more dependent on good dialogue or good pacing or whatever. And what I think like CGI has done is it has unleashed these imaginations to just kind of do whatever they want. But what you get are worse films. You get these smudged colors that just all kind of go together in a primary color soup and with terrible dialogue and pacing. And it's just this spectacle of color and CGI, whatever nonsense. And I see something similar with clothes. Like for me, I have real limitations. I put limits on the materials that I get. I try to avoid synthetic materials. And then I have a real budget limitation. And I think what those kinds of limits do is it really forces me to think more creatively about how I'm putting things together and how I'm achieving that kind of harmonious balance. To do anything, I can't just go out and get any material, go out and get any shape, any fabric, any color, whatever. I have these limitations. And I think that has really helped me to think more creatively about clothing. And I think most of us do have those limitations. And
right. If you're asking the question, how can I look really good for $60? Your creativity is going to have to come out.
Yeah. And it's not easy. Like that's the other thing about this is, what I'm arguing in this piece is I think it's important to be thinking more deliberately about our clothing for all sorts of reasons, from like beautifying public space, reinvesting in building beautiful public spaces and doing that with our own bodies and our own clothes and things, to building solidarity movements or whatever it is, fighting against the authoritarians who are all dressed well or who are using clothes as a weapon. It's hard. It requires more effort and time and thinking and research and putting often scarce funds toward it, and recognize that as well, that it does require some work to do that.
Yeah. But, you have some familiarity based on research you've done, writing you've done, with the history of human civilization. And one of the things you note in this piece is that the idea of being concerned with aesthetics and beauty as something frivolous rather than something fundamental to life is a little bit aberrational. And it kind of goes in with this strange modern efficiency logic. But if you look at traditional societies, indigenous societies around the world, people spend a lot of time decorating their bodies, making jewelry, tattooing themselves, making beautiful clothes. Aesthetics are really a very important part of life and have been across many, many human societies.
Yeah, definitely. And even an older human species, there's examples of Neanderthals having jewelry and doing self-decoration as well. And I think it's integral to being a human being, that having an interest in how you present yourself and decorating your own body, the thing that is yours first, your body, is, I think, beautifying it and making it something that you feel, proud of and whatnot, I think is absolutely is integral to so many human cultures through history. And even those that have the big empires, the big states that have come in the last 5,000 years or so, I think that's also been a rule through those as well. And it is a weirdly recent thing to be sort of unconcerned. It seems like just a recent trend to be so visibly unconcerned with self-decoration and self-presentation. And I speak a little bit in the piece about how that's connected to a kind of masculine gender norm just in the last few decades, where men are expected to take pride in not knowing how to dress and not caring about how they dress or caring about clothes. And which I find so weird to depend on somebody else, depend on your wife or mother or somebody to like do your laundry and dress you. It's so infantilizing. It doesn't strike me as masculine in any way. It strikes me as, childish and dependent and just infantile, just, juvenile. It's something that baffling to me. I don't know how that became the norm for men.
Yeah. Recently, I just published this weird book of speculative fiction about the very far future, imagining this future society. And one of the things that happened that I envisaged in this future society was that beauty standards had actually disappeared. And the reason they had disappeared was that they'd been replaced with costume standards, in that people's dress became so elaborate that you couldn't really tell what their bodies are like outside of what they wear and the accessories, and they all paint themselves and they all dress in these bizarre clothes. And so nobody is judged according, there's no hierarchy of physical beauty, because it's a hierarchy of the things that we apply to the bodies. And that's a great equalizer, because anyone, no matter what your physical form is like, you can paint yourself, you can decorate yourself. And the result is that anyone, no matter what their natural physical endowments are, can look beautiful in this society. It's a great exercise for trying to write a utopia, because you're like, well, how do we destroy X injustice? And I was like, well, how do we destroy beauty standards? And the way I came up with was, okay, there are very, very clothing obsessed people.
Yeah, that's great. I think that's very interesting, because I think, you look today, this contempt of clothing has accompanied an obsession with like gym culture, going to the gym and sculpting these very narrow ideas of what male and female bodies are supposed to look like. And it's weird to me that obsession with sculpting bodies, your physical flesh, has accompanied such a lack of interest in what's going on top of it. It seems like you're kind of inverting that. You're imagining this. It's
a very body positive. There's a whole section called body positivity about, how nobody cares at all about what shape people are. It's all about the clothes. It's something, where everyone can look good in clothes. You really don't actually need very much money. Derek Guy highlights, people who dress well from thrift stores, and it really is just a matter of, do you want to? Do you want to think about clothes? And there's this double standard, isn't there, where like nobody judges someone for buying a grill for $1,000. But if you buy a suit or a handbag, if a woman buys a handbag for $1,000, it's like, what a ridiculous indulgence. But it's like, is a grill like less of an indulgence? You don't need a grill. You just want something that gives you pleasure in your life.
Yeah, I think so many things, or like the gadgets, having 3 iPhones, or there's all these like so many conspicuous consumption things like that. Just people kind of accept, like, yeah, sure, that's fine. Buy $1,000 phone. Why not? But clothes are so fundamental. That's the other thing that I don't understand about this kind of attitude, is that these are like survival necessities for a lot of people who live in cold and wet climates. But it's something you do every day. You do it every single day, every morning. You put on clothes. And if I'm going to do something every day, I want to do it well. I cook every day. I want to cook well. I write every day. So I put a lot of energy into trying to write well. Like, these are things, if I'm going to do something, if it's going to take up so much of my time, I want to actually, invest my brain and thinking into doing it competently and effectively. And it's weird to me how that's just
right. And so much of your physical sensation, I'm going to be touching these things all day, so they need to feel good on me. They are most of what people see. Like, I got a face and I got hands, but other than that, you're just seeing clothes.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Like, I walk around on the street. I'm not talking to anybody. I'm just walking around. But like, yeah, that's all communicating is happening through those clothes. And such a like basic thing to want to do that in a way that's really thoughtful and good.
Now, before we conclude, I did want to get back to the issues in the clothing industry. When I read that introduction from your piece, you talk about exploitative and horrible and environmentally destructive and what have you, much of the clothing industry can be. So tell us a little bit more about the dark side of the contemporary clothing industry.
Yeah, and the 2 big categories are the labor exploitation and the environmental degradation. So the labor exploitation has been kind of endemic to the textile industry for thousands of years. Some of the first industries to ever exist are textile industries in these emerging empires, and are almost certainly being driven by forced or unsafe labor. The Atlantic slave trade is fueled by the textile industry. And today, one of the biggest factory accidents in modern history is the Rana Plaza in Bangladesh that kills over 1,000 people working in that one factory and injures 2,000 more. And this is something that I think has been a problem across the global North and South. I don't think it's as simple to say it's just a global South problem. And there's a lot of, I put in the piece some organizations that are working on this issue. There are a lot of garment workers in South who are organizing and fighting for better conditions. I think for those of us who are more on the consumption side, I think there are things that you can do. And I think it does matter. There's a kind of attitude that taking a systemic view of things means that the consumer doesn't have any agency or role to play. But I don't think that's totally true. It might be small and insubordinate or smaller than other actions that can be taken. But I think it still is important to be thinking about what we're buying. And so, doing the Shane hauls, the buying, massive amounts of disposable clothes is directly fueling exploitation of workers. There's just no way around that. Or buying extremely cheap clothes. The only way it's that cheap is that somebody is getting screwed on the production side. So, that doesn't mean just go out and look for expensive clothes necessarily. It means just being more aware of the production chain, where those clothes are coming from, what the kind of labor regulations are happening, where it's being made, and that sort of thing. On the environmental degradation side of things, I think it's a similar sort of story. You have all sorts of pollution happening from clothing production. You have, like I mentioned in the piece, the microplastic pollution. That's, every time you're putting synthetics in the washing machine, they're shedding these microplastics that are going, and, a massive part of the microplastic pollution that's all over, every part of the globe. There's no place in the world that it hasn't been contaminated by that. And leather has a huge environmental impact, from the animal feedlots that are destroying biodiversity to the treatment of the leather, which is often like chrome tanning, which is using these harsh chemicals that are polluting waterways. That also, it's an industry problem. And I think industry problems require solutions at that scale that are coming from regulations and international agreements, intervening at the point of production rather than consumption. But I think there's also things that we can do as consumers, like just avoiding synthetics or avoiding chrome tanned leathers or leathers that are coming from these mass farm production facilities. It's not an easy, I think all of these issues are huge global scale issues that require that level of attention, that scale of attention. But I think part of being more deliberate about what we're wearing, what we're buying, is doing that research to try to minimize harm on the consumption side as well. And I think, again, putting those limits, what you're buying, I think can make you think more creatively and have to be, bringing your creativity and imagination and thought to what you're wearing. It's a tough one, and it's like food. It's something that's a basic necessity, and producing it kind of scale that it's being produced, not really a way around having to make a lot of clothes and a lot of food for a lot of people. But I think there are major ways that interventions can improve it.
I like your comparison with food because it is something where I feel like there's a lot less controversy over whether liking nice food is a sign of being bourgeois. I feel like we've gotten to the point where a lot of people realize that everyone deserves to think about and eat really delicious and the best food. And it's okay if you want to spend your weekends making fancy food, or if you want to go out to a nice restaurant. I don't think there's much judgment on you, but clothes are different. And as you say, they are also a basic necessity. They're not frivolous. And I'm not necessarily sure how many people are going to come away from reading your article going, I should be a menswear guy.
We don't necessarily need more menswear guys in the world. I think that's okay.
Right. But hopefully they'll take clothes a little more seriously. They will notice them more. And you do point out the most serious issues, as well as defending strongly the interest in the aesthetic as being natural and good. So what they should do, tell people what they should do, they got to go to currentaffairs.org/subscribe right now. You can get the print edition. You can also subscribe digitally. You'll get immediate access to the PDF. This is currently the only way to read Sam's article. It will go online eventually, but we are an independent magazine. We have no advertising. We have no corporate backers. You need to subscribe, read Sam's wonderful, wonderful article, which I have illustrated with pictures of classic menswear and some weird menswear.
Oh, those are beautiful. I love that. It turned out so great. Those were, I don't know how you found those. Those are really beautiful.
Yeah, it's a good looking piece as well as our interest in the aesthetic means that a current affairs article does not just have to read well, it has to look good. And then people should also go to samueljmm.com if they want to read more about Sam, and they can follow you on Twitter at SJMMCD. And in addition, they can follow your Mr. Clothes account if they want to see you in clothes.
That's right. I got a lot of fit pics out there.
That's great. So they can see that on Instagram or Twitter. The account is YeahGoodOkay. That's YeahGoodOkay. And you can see some great pics of Sam in some nice clothes. So Samuel Miller McDonald, thank you so much for joining us on Current Affairs today.
Oh, thank you so much, Nathan. Always a pleasure.
The Current Affairs Podcast is a product of Current Affairs Magazine. If you are not subscribed to Current Affairs Magazine, visit currentaffairs.org/subscribe today and get our glorious print edition. The Current Affairs Podcast is released regularly every week on patreon.com/currentaffairs. Thanks for listening.